Bill with amendment presently. Members, we now move to consideration of the Regulatory Reform Bill. We move to Part 1, and this is debate on clauses 3 to 22. The question is that Part 1 stand part. The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Chairman, this piece of legislation is in the name, I believe, of the Honourable John Bank. The name actually is very interesting because the name on the bill still has some reason. I don't know if this is an error. The Honourable Rodney Hyde, his name is still on there, and that casts a sort of a nightmarish shadow over the debate. For us here, sort of a genetic throwback. We have got the genetic throwback. Actually, replaced Mr Hyde in Epsom, of course. And this is an interesting piece of legislation because, of course, the legislation that we are dealing with was brought in as a sort of in the form of an omnibus bill, and was part of the outcome of the quality regulation review, which was led and initiated by the previous government. And what it does, it's a bit, I suppose, like a statutes amendment bill in some ways, in that it tidies up a whole series of small technical amendments to a whole series of bills. And it's interesting because, without getting into into detail, this bill, of course, when we last debated it, was in a slightly different form, Mr Chair. And part of that bill was that Mr Banks brought to the Parliament was to repeal 31 acts which were spent. And I recall when I spoke in the last debate on this, I asked the clerk, because I'm not a lawyer, what is a spent act? And the clerk was good enough to inform me that effectively it's an act which doesn't exist, in effect. It has no effect on anyone, no compliance cost on any business, any individual. So one of Mr Banks's great contributions, as he was hauled back out of the political crypt and then got into some very sticky stuff, some very sticky and gooey political stuff over the last 3 months, was to bring up the great reformer that John Banks is, the Minister of Small Business, was to bring in a bill into this House that repeals 31 acts that don't exist. Now I say, and I said last time, and I did mean it, that takes a certain particular type of genius to achieve that in the annals of the Parliament. But I say this, it is interesting that this bill does have some merit. It deals with, for instance, the reclassification of videos and DVDs and those sorts of things. And I went and visited the movie people who produced these up in Auckland, and it was very interesting. Part 1, yeah, I'm coming to Part 1, absolutely. I'm dealing with Part 1.
Part 1 is about agricultural compounds and veterinary medicines.
Yeah,
it's a long way away from other things.
Well, only in interpretation, though, Mr Chair, I would say. Only in interpretation. You could say you've got a few animal control and veterinary medicines required over the other side of the House. My point but I will jump it, sir, and I'll use those as the examples. My point is that, yes, this bill does deal with a large number of technical amendments, and some of them are very worthwhile. But let's get a bit real about it. This bill does not deal, for instance, with the big issues of reform in terms of compliance costs for small business. Yes, it deals with some components which will assist some small businesses, but it doesn't go anywhere near the big slash and burn promotion that Rodney Hyde and now his successor, the Minister for Small Business, John Banks, said they would do. They came in and said that they would slash compliance costs. What did they actually do? They did something profound. They changed the name from the Regulatory Improvement Bill to the Regulatory Reform Bill. That was the great sort of campaigning, the great sort of slash into the future that Mr Banks did. And then, because they changed one word in the title, they then claimed credit for this whole process. And I just say that this is, I said in the first debate, this is a good process, a heavyweight process, but a lightweight content. This is dressed up, it's got a bit of weight to the bill, this is dressed up as something magnificent, something that will reduce compliance costs for millions of dollars will flow from this and reduce compliance costs for small business. The truth is, sir, this is an omnibus bill. It tinkers around the edges and makes some technical amendments in the areas that we're debating now, sir, with Part 1 that the Chairman said. But it in no way actually addresses the big issues that Mr Banks said he was going to come in and deal with. You know, really cutting through compliance costs, saving money for small business. The guts of it is 31 acts that don't exist, he repeals. and no wonder Mr Banks is sort of now appealing to the deity for help, because his contribution as a minister, marred with scandal, but even over and above that, is marred with a lack of work ethic. A lack of work ethic, a lot of puffing, a lot of blowing, but presents a bill to the House that will do very, very little in a practical sense for small businesses, whether they be in the agricultural field or in other sectors, sir. A lot of bluster, a lot of billowing, but never actually delivered the goods.
I call Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr Chair.